The castle stood against the wind like a stone giant, cold and proud, its walls glimmering with frost beneath a pale winter sun. Inside, the air was still, heavy with the smell of smoke, damp stone, and centuries of breath. The castle was a fortress, a home, and a prison of chill. In the Middle Ages, warmth was not a comfort. It was a privilege, a fleeting guest that had to be courted and fought for with every ember. To step into a medieval castle in midwinter was to step into another world. The walls were thick, sometimes more than 2 meters of stone, built to resist siege and fire, but not the creeping fingers of cold. The stones held the frost like a memory. Even when fires burned day and night, the heat barely reached beyond a few paces. The rest of the room remained in shadow, silent and freezing. Every breath hung in the air like a ghost. In the earliest centuries, warmth gathered in only one place, the great hall. It was the beating heart of the castle, where the lord held court, where servants worked, where guests feasted. And in its centre burned the hearth, a wide pit carved into the stone floor, filled with crackling logs and glowing embers. The smoke drifted upward to a louver in the roof, a crude opening that let some of it escape. The rest filled the room, swirling above the rafters like a dark cloud. People's eyes stung, their clothes reeked of soot. But it was warmth, and warmth was life. At night, the fire was the only light. It painted trembling gold across tapestries and armour. It shimmered on cups and goblets. It was the symbol of the Lord's wealth, because firewood cost dearly. To keep a single fire burning for days required an endless stream of logs, cut, dried, and carried from the forests beyond the castle walls. Whole teams of woodcutters worked year-round to feed the hearth of one noble household. To sit near that fire was to sit near power, but even that great blaze could not reach the corners of the hall. The servants huddled in the shadows, their fingers stiff, their breath white. They learned to live with cold as if it were another master. Wool and fur were their armour, ale and laughter their brief respite. They stuffed straw into shoes, wrapped cloaks around their heads, and waited for the seasons to turn. By the 13th century, the age of open hearths began to fade. Builders discovered something extraordinary: the chimney. A simple idea, a stone tunnel rising through the wall to carry smoke upward, transformed how people lived. Fires could now be built against a wall instead of the centre of a hall. Rooms could finally breathe, and for the first time heat could be contained, directed, and shared. With the arrival of chimneys came the wall fireplace, massive, carved and crowned with a mantle. Flames danced inside these stone mouths, their smoke whisked away through narrow flues. It was an invention of both beauty and necessity. The lord and lady could now dine or rest in chambers that were warm enough to remove a cloak. Their bedchambers, private and thickly curtained, began to resemble sanctuaries rather than caves, but only for them. The servants' rooms remained barren and cold, warmed only by proximity to the kitchens or the stables, where animals' bodies gave off more heat than any hearth they could afford. Firewood remained precious. A castle might consume a forest's worth of wood in a single winter. Oak and ash were best, burning hot and long. Pine was smoky but abundant. When wood ran short, charcoal was used, a fuel that burned clean but was difficult to make, requiring pits and patience. Peasants gathered fallen branches, nobles burned logs the size of a man. Warmth was hierarchy carved in flame. For those who could not command a fireplace, there were smaller comforts. Braziers, metal bowls on stands, were filled with glowing coals and carried from room to room. They cast a gentle heat and an orange glow that flickered like candlelight. Monks, scribes, and noblewomen warmed their hands above them while they worked. Yet these were dangerous companions. A brazier could choke a room with smoke, or consume the very rushes that lined the floor. Every comfort came with risk. In winter, even the most powerful men slept beneath heavy canopies, their beds draped with wool, linen, and fur. The thick curtains around the bed were not merely decoration, they were survival. Once drawn, they trapped a pocket of heat created by the human body, a private climate within the frozen castle. Beneath the sheets, servants sometimes slid bed warmers, flat metal pans filled with embers, their handles long and blackened by use. They were passed over the sheets to banish the cold before the master lay down. The coals hissed softly, leaving the faint scent of iron and ash. The walls themselves were dressed for warmth. Rich tapestries hung from stone, thick with scenes of battle or legend. Beyond their beauty, they served as insulation, trapping air between fabric and wall. Floors were strewn with rushes or straw, changed only a few times a year. Though they hid dirt and bones from past meals, they also softened footsteps and held a bit of heat. Doors were covered with heavy drapes to block draughts that slithered through cracks. In many castles, kitchens became the warmest places of all. There, fires burned without rest, roasting meats, heating cauldrons, boiling broth. The cooks and scullions who toiled in the heat might envy no one in winter. Yet when their work was done, and the fires dimmed, they too returned to chill chambers, where frost crept along the stone. The great hall remained the castle's furnace, both in heat and in spirit. Its fire was never allowed to die, for it represented the continuity of life and rule. When guests arrived, they were brought to the hall and seated near the blaze, their hands stretched out to the glow. The sight of a roaring fire beneath the high beams was not only comfort, it was status. It said that the Lord had means enough to burn wood in abundance, that warmth itself bent to his will. But warmth was never equal. The difference between lord and servant was measured not only in gold or land, but in degrees of heat. The lord's chamber might have a hearth with carved lions and polished stone. The maid who cleaned it slept in a corner of the hall, curled in a blanket, her candle flickering beside her. To be cold was to be poor. To command warmth was to hold power. As the centuries turned, the art of heating evolved. In the castles of Germany and the north, builders began to experiment with clay stoves, known as Kachelofen. These marvels held heat long after the fire had gone out. A single load of wood could warm a room for hours. Some were fed from behind the wall, so that smoke and soot remained hidden, and only the gentle warmth of the tiles reached the chamber. This was luxury of the new age, the transition from raw flame to controlled comfort. Still, most of Europe remained bound to smoke and draught. In England, France, and Scotland, the familiar stone fireplaces endured. The flickering firelight still played across armour and cloth, still hissed as drops of rain fell down the chimney. On cold mornings, the first sound in the castle was the echo of kindling breaking, the crackle of the first flame. Servants moved through corridors, breath steaming, carrying buckets of coal or armfuls of logs to feed the lord's chambers. The scent of burning oak was the scent of life returning. For the common people outside the castle walls, warmth was even rarer. Peasants lived in timber huts with central hearths, much like the old halls of the nobles. Smoke seeped through the thatch, and the walls blackened over the years until they gleamed like charcoal. They slept beside animals for warmth and shared blankets stuffed with straw. Yet in their modest homes the fire was sacred, the one thing that made night bearable. When the fire died, so did comfort, cooking, and safety. Relighting it meant striking flint against steel and praying for a spark. For the poorest, heat was faith. Inside the castle, fire took on ritual meaning. It marked the changing of the hours, the rhythm of work and rest. Bells might signal prayer, but the lighting of torches and hearths signalled life. In some great halls, a servant was tasked solely with tending the flames, feeding them, raking them, ensuring that smoke did not choke the chamber. His work was invisible but vital. If the fire failed, it was shameful. If it caught and burned too bright, disastrous. Winters were long and merciless. Chroniclers wrote of frost creeping even into royal chambers, of ink freezing in wells, of wine turned to slush. The cold was a companion everyone shared, from king to cook. And so the people of that age learned endurance. They layered garments, lined boots with fur, wrapped themselves in cloaks until they resembled moving bundles of wool. They drank mulled wine, spiced ale, and hot broth not for pleasure but survival. The glow of a hearth became more than heat. It was hope itself. The relationship between man and fire in the Middle Ages was intimate and constant. It cooked his food, forged his weapons, lit his nights, and guarded his life against the cold. But it also smoked his lungs, blackened his ceilings, and devoured his forests. Every ember was a bargain between comfort and cost. By the 15th century, as the medieval world began to soften into the Renaissance, castles slowly transformed. Windows gained glass, chimneys multiplied, tapestries thickened. Architects designed private chambers with built-in flues, and the noble could move from room to room without losing all sense of warmth. Yet even then, the chill lingered. To live in stone was to live with cold, and so, across generations, people adapted not by defeating winter, but by coexisting with it. They mastered small acts of warmth, closing curtains early, banking fires with ash to make them last the night, sleeping close to the hearth. Children grew up knowing the feel of cold floors and the comfort of the first spark at dawn. If one were to walk through a castle today, one might still feel that ancient chill. The air holds the memory of centuries, the echo of footsteps on flagstones, the whisper of fires long gone. The hearths are cold now, the chimneys silent, yet the soot still clings to their stones, testimony to the lives once lived within. These walls, once blackened by smoke and warmed by flame, still tell the story of human endurance. The story of heating a castle is not just the story of technology, it is the story of survival. Every log split, every brazier lit, every curtain drawn was an act of defiance against the frozen world outside. The fire was the soul of the castle, fragile and fierce. It burned through war, famine, and plague. It watched nights age, children grow, and dynasties fall. And though centuries have passed, the echo of those fires remains deep in the stone. The people who built those walls are gone, but their struggle against the cold endures in every flicker of a modern flame. When we sit beside a fireplace today, watching the logs collapse into glowing ash, we share something with them. We are drawn to the same warmth, humbled by the same chill. The castle, the hearth, and the human heart are bound by that eternal need to turn darkness into light and cold into life.